Hello, and welcome to another video breaking down academic journal articles into their distinct parts. If you have not already, and especially if you're in my class, watch my previous videos on thesis statements, research questions, hypotheses, abstracts, introductions, and literature reviews. This one covers a lot of ground. I will first contextualize scientific research methods before discussing the purpose of the methods section. I will run through an example, the same one as last time, Dolinski et al. 2017 on replicating Stanley Milgram's infamous experience on obedience to authority. Research methods are essential to understand. You will take entire classes during your undergraduate and graduate careers dedicated to qualitative and quantitative research methods. I took a general sociological research methods class as an undergrad. Then during my PhD, I took a statistics and quantitative methods course and another advanced qualitative course. My dissertation was qualitative, so that advanced qualitative course was so important. While it is way beyond the scope of this video to go in depth into the philosophy of science or epistemological debates undergirding research methods or specific research methods, we can start with one overarching question that all researchers are concerned with. How do I collect good data? In order to explain reality, you have to observe reality. Your observations become data that describe that reality. If your observations are bad, or if your data are bad, then your explanation of reality will be bad. So, for example, I use this in my introduction to sociology classes every semester. It's wonderful. It's sort of wonderful. It's also sort of sad. Have you ever looked at American political platform polls of the major parties? They are horrendous examples of data collection. All parties and campaigns do this to some extent, but I'm going to pick on Donald Trump here. His campaigns have outdone everyone else for the Bad Survey Award. Check it out. Let me show you an example here. Alright, so if you go to his campaign website, you see a poll, the official 2020 Trump versus Democrat poll. So let's break this down. Why is this a bad poll? Check out this poll on his presidential campaign website. The first question here is, who would you rather see fix our nation's shattered immigration policies? Your choices are President Trump or an MS-13 loving Democrat. The person who wrote this question should be utterly ashamed of themselves, and if they have a PhD, it should be revoked. Your choice is not a neutral one between Trump and a Democrat. It is between Trump and a Democrat who loves an international criminal gang. This is a biased question because while the Trump answer is neutral, the Democrat answer clearly creates a negative association. Very few people would like anyone who loves MS-13 to become president regardless of their political party. Other questions ask you if you believe, if you would trust President Trump or a sleazy Democrat to always put America first, if you believe that President Trump or a lying Democrat will keep their promises, if you believe that President Trump or a low IQ Democrat is better for America, and finally, if you will vote for President Trump or a radical socialist Democrat in 2020. Again, no one wants a sleazy, lying, or low IQ candidate of any party to become president. But because those negative associations are attached only to the Democrat, then most people will choose Donald Trump even if they might prefer a non-lying Democrat over him, thus skewing the results. And just so everyone is clear, these questions are aimed at the Democratic candidate, Joe Biden, who Trump often says is a radical socialist. Biden is a moderate Democrat by any measure. He is neither radical nor a socialist. The questions then not only create a negative association, but they include false claims, which makes the data and the explanation of reality even worse. What is the point of me explaining this bad survey? What is the point of the bad survey itself? It is written to collect purposefully skewed data so that the Trump campaign can use a scientific poll to argue that the American public overwhelmingly supports President Trump. But the conclusion, the explanation of reality, is wrong because the data collection methods were bad. This whole thing, the purposefully biased survey and using invalid findings to give the public an inaccurate picture of reality, is unethical. And also, this poll suffers from selection bias, which means that the results will be skewed because the majority of the people going to Trump's website are already Trump supporters. So the answers to these questions, even if individual questions were not biased, will already be in favor of Trump because the sample of the population who takes the poll is not representative of all American voters. This kind of thing is important for you to understand because research methods inform a lot of what you see in science reporting and on the news as well. Research methods are important for you to understand so that you are scientifically literate in your daily life and understand how research can be manipulated and how results can be manipulated. But more to the point here, because we're really talking about academic research, the methods sections of academic articles, they are where the authors describe the what, who, why, when, where, and how of their research design so that you, dear reader, know what they did and how they arrived at their conclusions. In the methods section, you will determine, let me make this bigger so you can actually see it here. In the methods section, you will determine once and for all whether the study was quantitative or qualitative. Remember that qualitative methods involve the collection and analysis of verbal, textual, and other descriptive data. We are not measuring the amounts of things like in quantitative studies. Rather, we are interested in describing the characteristics or qualities of things. Common qualitative methods include observations, participant observations, interviews, surveys with open-ended questions, ethnographies, grounded theory, and phenomenology, to name just a few of the ones that you will undoubtedly come across. Quantitative methods involve the collection and analysis of numerical data, numbers, statistics. Quantitative research methods include close-ended surveys, such as Likert scales, not Likert scales. This is the most mispronounced thing in all of science. Likert scales, which are those surveys that ask you to circle 1 if you strongly disagree that vanilla ice cream tastes better with those little bean flecks in it, and to circle 5 if you strongly agree that vanilla ice cream tastes better with the bean flecks. Your response is coded numerically as a number. Other quantitative methods include experiments, data mining, and other statistical analyses of large data sets. Methods sections describe the research participants, who was the study conducted on, who participated in the study, and the research setting, where was the study conducted. They discuss key variables, including how variables were operationalized or defined so that they can be measured. They also might discuss strengths and weaknesses of their method. If that is not discussed here in the methods section, it will likely be in the discussion section or the conclusion section. Another important reason that authors spend time writing detailed methods sections is so that other researchers can redo their studies. This is called replication, where someone redoes a study to see if they get the same results. And replication is an important part of the scientific process. Now, without extensive training in research methods, you will not fully understand everything, even most things, that you read in methods sections. And that's okay. I teach this stuff, and I don't know every type of statistical analysis and every type of methodological theory that I come across. You want to get the gist of it and be able to pull out the main points. So, that's research methods section. Next, let's talk about the results, which is often called the findings section. If you see findings, that's the results. Or if you see results, that's the findings. This may or may not get its own section depending on the article. Sometimes the results will be in or directly after the methods section, especially if it is a quantitative article, and other times it is merged with the discussion. In qualitative pieces, findings may be reported thematically throughout the article. In a non-empirical or theoretical article, there may be no results because no one conducted any research, they're just talking about theory. The purpose of the results section, though, is to present data to the reader as objectively as possible, that is, with minimal interpretation. Especially in quantitative articles, you'll see lots of charts, tables, and graphs in the results section that just display the data, the results. Authors here will often state whether their hypotheses were supported by the data or not. The discussion section is where authors interpret their data. They will often restate the hypothesis, thesis, or research question and write about how or why these data were supported or not, or how or why the research question or the thesis were supported or not because based on the data. Authors bring the literature back, entering that conversation again, and they discuss how their findings contribute to the field. The discussion includes implications of the findings, not just the impact on the field, but on society as a whole sometimes. It explains why people should care about what the researchers found. Finally, the discussion section often mentions limitations of the study or areas of further research. This is useful because it helps readers understand what the study did not do and how future researchers could improve upon it. If you are looking for ideas for your own research project, go find articles on your topic and read their discussion section. The authors will tell you what they hope future people studying this topic should do next. The discussion sections and the conclusion sections are often combined. Certain things, if not said in a discussion section, will usually appear in the conclusion, but all papers must conclude. They must end. The authors here will restate the main point and overall purpose of the paper. They summarize the main findings again. Was the hypothesis, thesis, or research question supported and answered? If so, briefly, how and why? They will offer recommendations for researchers, policymakers, or some of their target audience, further implications not mentioned in the discussion section, and some final considerations for the reader, like Jerry Springer's final thoughts at the end of one of his episodes. Did you know, interestingly, that I found out while doing this and making this association between Jerry Springer and final thoughts, that he was a politician and news commentator before the Jerry Springer show? Yeah, he used to be the mayor of Cincinnati, and he worked for Robert Kennedy before he was assassinated as a political strategist. So bizarre. And the Jerry Springer show, before it was the tabloid show that many of you might have grown up with, it was actually a news commentary show, but it got low ratings, and so they started doing paternity tests and having people fight on stage. Anyway, authors answer the important so what question again in the conclusion. Why do we care about this paper? Readers need to know why they should care about your research, and so it is good practice to leave them with a strong reason for caring at the end, in the conclusion. And that's that. Let's get into an example. We're going to talk about Dolinski et al. This one on electric shocks. So if you don't have this paper in front of you, you can Google the title and find it in a database. Hopefully you can at least see some of it. Or if you're on D2L, you can grab it from the folder that this is in. But you know the drill if you've been watching these videos already. Pause the video, read the methods, results, discussion, and conclusion section. You actually don't have to read the abstract, the introduction, or the literature review to follow along here, because each section does specific things, and even if you don't know the background, you still should have some good understanding of what that section accomplishes. So read the whole thing if you haven't already, but definitely read those 4 sections that we're going to talk about today. Okay, you've read it? Great. First question. Where is the methods section in this article? Let me find my notes here. Where is the methods section in this article? If you said procedure, you are correct. This article's methods section is called the procedure section. It's not called the methods, but it's the same thing. So let's go through the methods or the procedure section and talk about what is important, and I will point out some questions to guide you through a second article later that you can do on your own that I'm just going to briefly talk about because this video will be long enough as it is. So if you are following along in the procedure paragraph, I'm just going to almost read along and annotate verbally for you. The first thing that the authors do is describe how participants were recruited. They were incentivized with some cash, which is always useful. Participants were recruited via convenience sampling and snowball sampling, which are 2 common sampling methods. They don't say these words, but that's what the sampling methods are. Grabbing someone off the sidewalk, that's convenient. You're just grabbing who's nearby. Asking students, who it's unclear whether the students were participants themselves in the study, but asking students to find other people they know to participate in the study, that's called snowball sampling or snowballing. You can imagine that the researchers then ask those new participants to ask their friends too, and that would be another layer of snowball sampling, right? The snowball starts off small, and as it rolls down the hill, it gets bigger and bigger. The researchers ask people close to them to be participants, and then they ask them to ask somebody else, or if they know other people, and so the participant pool grows and grows, just like that snowball rolling down the hill. You might think that asking people on the street is a simple random sample, but it is not, because in simple random sampling, everyone has an equal chance to be selected. Everyone in the population has an equal chance to be selected. Or everyone in the sample that you chose has an equal chance to be selected for participation, further narrowing that sample. So if I stand on a street corner, not everyone has an equal chance to be selected, right? Only those people walking by that street corner while I'm standing there even have a chance. And even then, I will choose to ask some and not others based on my particular biases or whatever it is. There's a gnat flying around or something in front of me. I apologize for acting weird. I don't apologize for acting weird. I lean into it. Okay, so that's the sampling there. Later on in this paragraph, the authors discuss what is called the elimination criteria. That is, they discuss why some of the recruits did not complete the study. If they were psychology students, then they surely would have guessed what the study was about because they would have heard of the Milgram studies already, and they would have skewed the results. I suppose I should go ahead and apologize to you now for ruining your chance at being recruited for a similar study dedicated to memory and learning. You would spoil the study. You could have invested that $50, and by the time you were my age, you could have been rich and bought a house, so sorry that I've ruined that for you. But if the recruits had some trauma that this experiment might trigger, then the researchers could have violated ethics guidelines governing doing undue harm to participants. So some key questions that were answered here in this paragraph are, who were the participants and how were they selected for the study? Or how were they eliminated from the study? The next paragraph is very long, like a very long paragraph. It explains in detail how the experiment proceeded from the time the participant entered the lab to when they exited. It discusses methodological decisions that the researchers made to comply with ethical standards. It mentions important similarities and differences to the original Milgram experiments, and most importantly, it operationalizes or defines some key variables and shows how many independent variables were controlled. Let's read through it. Well, a confederate, by the way, before you get started. If you don't know this word, a confederate is a fake participant. They are someone who is part of the research team, but the actual participant thinks that the confederate was recruited to the study just like they were. So the participant is briefed on the study, and the authors reveal how they deceived the participant. This sounds bad, deceiving a participant, right? Deceiving someone sounds bad. But it is actually a necessary part of this experiment and illustrates a control variable that all participants will play the same role, that of the teacher. The informed consent form is important because human subjects must agree to be part of laboratory experiments. You can't force someone to shock someone else against their will. The consent form also gives the participant a way out if they become uncomfortable. There is a long discussion of how they set up the experiment, showing the participant/teacher how to use the shock generator, how to read instructions to the confederate/learner, and so on. Note that the learner gets specific questions wrong every time, right? Like number 13. They get specific questions wrong every time. This controls for when and how many mistakes were made, or when the teacher might pull a shock switch. If the teacher wavers on pulling the shock switch, the researcher, the authority figure, says the exact same thing to them. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. If you go back and watch the original Milgram experiments, go find them on YouTube. It's fascinating. People are expressing doubt about potentially shocking someone to death, and the researcher just very calmly behind them says, "You have no other choice. The experiment must continue. You must go on." And the person says, "Well, okay, if you accept responsibility for it," and the researcher will say, "I accept all responsibility," and then they shock the crap out of somebody. It's kind of funny, but the implications are very serious. So do you see the importance of controlling for all these variables? Each participant is put in a situation that is the exact same as other participants. So any differences in the behaviors of the participants should be a result of their own internal differences, their ability to resist authority and act according to their conscience. And differences then cannot be explained by differences in the environment, because the environment is the same. They've controlled for all these independent variables. The authors note at the end of this paragraph that they collected key data when the participant refused when the participant refused further participation in the experiment, or when their doubts over the harm they were inflicting on the learner required the authority figure to tell them to keep going. These are dependent variables. The participant's ability to resist authority, their ability to resist authority is operationalized as their willingness to continue shocking someone. That depends upon the changes in the independent or control variables. So a key question to ask when reading a method section is, what are the key variables? That is, what are the researchers measuring? In the next paragraph, the authors describe a clever thing that they did. They introduce a question. Do you think that it hurts? Do you think the shock hurts? This ensures that the participant is totally aware of the pain that they are causing the learner. Thus, the researchers note that when the participants raise the voltage, they do so with the knowledge that they are hurting another person more and more. The next paragraph points out variables defining the authority figure. Both of the authority figures are male, but they vary by age. And defining the learner. The age is the same, but it varies by sex, which, if you remember or read from the earlier in the article, is really what they're interested in this experiment. Their research question is, does the sex of the learner, which is an independent variable that the researchers are controlling, does the sex of the learner have any effect on how much participants will shock them? Finally, at the end of this section, the authors describe the debriefing. The debriefing is when they tell participants what the study was really about. Debriefing is especially important in a study like this that can cause psychological harm to the participants. Imagine these people lying awake at night thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe I shocked someone until they screamed, and I kept doing it just because a man in a white lab coat told me to. Who am I? In the original Milgram experiments, the participants grappled with the fact that they could have literally shocked someone to death. How do you live with that? But that's part of the point of these studies. We are far more capable of inflicting fatal harm to a stranger just because someone in authority tells us to than we think. And these experiments are just for some cash. What would we do when the stakes are real? I said earlier that you would determine whether the study was qualitative or quantitative in the methods section. Are you sure which it was yet? Hint, experiments are almost always quantitative. If you are still not sure though, the results section in this article unequivocally shows quantitative data in the form of numbers and graphs, to describe what happened in the experiment. I also said that the methods section might discuss strengths and weaknesses of the study. It doesn't describe either here, so we'll have to wait for the results or the discussion section to describe strengths and weaknesses, but I bet we'll see some. So, onto the results section. This section objectively reports the findings, quantitatively in this case. What did they find? They found that 90% of participants pulled all 10 switches. But look at what variables they say had no significant effect in the study. That's the beginning, this first paragraph here. The first sentence. Because initial analyses demonstrated that neither the manner in which participants were recruited, so it didn't matter if they were pulled off the street or if they're the friend of a friend, neither the manner in which the participants were recruited nor the person of the experimenter. Should there be a comma there? Because initial analyses demonstrated that neither the manner in which participants were recruited nor the person of the experimenter, the female learner, or the male learner had any impact on the structure of results, these factors were not taken into account in further analysis. Wow, this is really interesting, right? They come straight out and tell you what independent variables did not matter, what did not affect the outcome. The age of the authority figure, they said, the age of the authority figure did not affect obedience. I thought that because that participants might be more likely to listen to an older man, but it seems that they listened to the younger one just as often, so age was not a factor. And look, the sex of the learner did not matter either. On page 9, where is it? On page 931, the second paragraph, we also examined, on the second paragraph on the left side, we also examined the impact of the learner's sex on obedience, It is worth remarking that although the number of people refusing to carry out the commands of the experimenter was 3 times greater when the student was a woman, the small sample size does not allow us to draw excessively far-reaching conclusions. And then they show you a graph so that you know that this is a really important finding that they want to report. It was the research question, so they need to report the data, even if they didn't really find anything. So check it out. They said that it is worth remarking that more people stopped the experiments when the learner was a woman, but the small sample size doesn't allow them to really draw any conclusions. I mean, 6 and 2 out of a sample of 80, yeah, it's a tiny size, and you can't say very much about that. What that means essentially is that chance could have made it 6 and 2, and too much can be attributed to unknown factors rather than attributing it definitively to sex. So they found a difference, but the sample was so small that they can't say with certainty that sex mattered. So here is a weakness and a way that you could improve this study. You do it again, but with a larger sample to try and replicate this effect, but with higher confidence. You need a larger sample for this. The authors were also struck by how few people expressed doubt or stopped during the experiment. Milgram's original studies and many of the replications found that 65% of people pulled all the switches, but here it was about 90%. Granted, as they discussed earlier, they used only 10 switches instead of Milgram's 30, so that explains a lot of the difference. But remember that in Milgram's study, 85% of participants did pull the first 10 switches, so this is actually pretty close. They found that 90% pulled the first 10. But from looking at table 1, this one, we can see a couple things. And this is objectively reported data, right? They're reporting exactly, objectively what happened. There is no interpretation here. But we want to interpret it, and hopefully they'll interpret it in the discussion section. But actually we see, spoiler alert, that they don't really do a lot of interpretation. But this is why, I'll say why this is important later. Anyway, looking at the data in table 1, we can see a couple things. A little less than half of the participants who expressed doubt, that's all these people, a little less than half of those people stopped. More females than males stopped completely. It's interesting again, but there's a small sample size, so it may not mean much. All but one person only expressed doubt on one switch. This guy, 23-year-old male, expressed doubt on 2 switches, but everybody else only expressed doubt on 1 switch. And about half of the participants who continued pulling the switches only needed to receive pressure from the authority figure 1 time to continue. What this says to me is that people generally just need 1 firm push from an authority figure to keep doing something that they are uncomfortable doing. Anyway, the discussion will probably repeat some of the stuff I just said, but I can't help but interpret this data. So in the discussion section, the authors are going to, hopefully, interpret the data. They should do some interpretation. They will discuss the findings in the context of the literature, and they will talk about the implications of their findings. These are important questions to ask yourself about any discussion section. How do the findings contribute to the literature, and what are the implications of this study? Note that this discussion section also concludes the paper. There's no separate conclusion section. You will often see that. The discussion and conclusion merged together. So since they are merged here, the discussion should also mention strengths or weaknesses, suggest some further areas of the study, restate the purpose or the so what of the question of the paper, and provide some summary of the paper. So what do we have here? Well, the first paragraph compares the results of this study and Milgram's first 10 switches. Easy, cool. The second paragraph says that participants demonstrated such a total obedience that we achieved a ceiling effect. Where did they say that? They said that here. Participants demonstrated such total obedience that we achieved a ceiling effect, making it exceptionally difficult to demonstrate the influence of any moderators on the dependent variable. This means that since 90% of people, nearly everyone, pulled all 10 shock switches, the researchers could not tell which variables caused them to do so or prevented the other 10% from not doing so. The sample size is too small. Everybody pulled all the switches for the most part, so you don't know why they pulled them. You don't know differences between the people and what differences matter. If you line up 10 comedians, 5 men and 5 women, and everyone thinks that they are equally funny, then you can't tell what effect the comedian's gender has on how funny the audiences perceive them to be. You need a lot more people not to think they're funny. It's the same here. You need a lot more people not to pull all 10 switches to be able to say something about why people don't pull 10 switches. But to do that under these conditions, you need a larger sample size. The authors then point out the lack of a definitive sex variable influence on obedience. They effectively toss their hands up and say that the results may provide inspiration for further studies in the paradigm. What that says is that I hope that this is interesting to other people, and other people should replicate this study and do it again with a bigger sample size. They clearly state that the hypothesis was not supported. Right? We are forced to admit that we did not confirm the hypothesis that the sex of the person being shocked with the electricity would influence the level of obedience displayed by the participants. So sex didn't matter in this case. They're not a strong enough effect. And I like the way they say this, right? You'll see this sometimes. We are forced to admit, right? They really wanted to find that sex mattered, but when you're doing research, you've got to be open to having your hypotheses proven wrong by the data, by reality. They asked good questions, but reality said, nope, and that's okay. This is still useful stuff. Right? They contextualize their findings in the larger literature on this topic, which they say focuses on seeking factors affecting the level of obedience. They note that Milgram's original findings remain remarkably consistent, no matter what researchers try and do to find alternative explanations or ways of changing the level of obedience. They conclude with a quick summary of the study's significance and a bit of a prophetic story about Milgram, which is neat stuff. I did some more armchair analyses of their findings than they did. There's really not a lot of interpretation here. But that is why the authors report the findings objectively. They don't always have room to elaborate on every possible or interesting thing in the results or discussion. That is up to the reader sometimes. And is another reason why you need to develop scientific literacy in research methods, so that you can effectively read data like this, like they report, and draw your own informed conclusions. Now, there's one other thing that I didn't put in my script and I realized later. If you watched the previous video on introductions, you remember that one of their other research questions was looking at this, one of the gaps that they were trying to fill in the literature was that they were doing this study in Poland, in a former Soviet bloc country, and in a country that is experiencing an authoritarian turn right now. So they were really interested in thinking about and finding levels of obedience in a country that has a communist history and that is experiencing an authoritarian turn. They assumed, I'm sure, that people would be more obedient here. They obviously did not find evidence to support that Polish people are any more obedient than Americans and other groups that the study was done on, because they never mentioned Poland again, which is a weird oversight since they made a deal of it in the literature review and the introduction. But whatever. Again, read these articles critically. Sometimes you'll finish and you'll say, well, what about this other thing they mentioned at the beginning? And it just seems to be missing. So we actually didn't learn anything about Poland or Polish people compared to Americans, really, in this article, besides they might be the same. But again, a bigger sample size might show some effect. I have no idea. Anyway, I was going to review a second article here, the same one I did in the previous video, Rosenberg et al. 2019 on participants' perspectives on drug treatment programs in the criminal justice system. But this video was long enough, so if I do get a bunch of requests for another one, I will do this article in full. But hopefully Dolinski et al. Was enough. I went through it in good detail. If you do read Rosenberg et al., note the main difference right off the bat, that Rosenberg et al. Is primarily a qualitative study. It's a qualitative study. Though participant demographics, drug use history, and drug treatment program involvement are reported quantitatively. Note how differently the methods section and the results sections read because it is a qualitative study rather than a quantitative study. Instead of reporting numbers in the findings, the authors report textual pieces of interview transcripts, and they organize these pieces of data by conceptual or thematic categories. The categories were derived from qualitative coding, as you can read about in the methods section, which involves painstakingly, and trust me, it is a world of pain, but it's kind of fun. If you like tedium, you'll enjoy it. Painstakingly going through your interview transcripts and tagging the text with codes, or asking yourself at every line of the interview, what is this about? That's how they get the qualitative data categories and are able to report in such nice detail the qualitative data in this article. So I hope this video was useful to you in understanding the content and functions of methods, results, discussion, and conclusion sections of academic journal articles. Remember, the methods section explains how the study was conducted, the results objectively report the data, the discussion interprets the data and places findings in the larger context of the literature in the field, and the conclusion sums up the main points, mentions implications, additional considerations, or ideas for future research, and concludes the paper. And after that, there's usually some in-matter, acknowledgments, disclosing any conflicts of interest, where they got the money for funding from, what different authors contributed to the paper, and a very important references section, which I don't have a video about, but might be a good idea to think about that. So, have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you for watching.